Shadow Slave by Guiltythree. Chapter 55, Lucky People. When they returned to the makeshift camp, the first thing that Nephi's did was come up to Cassie. "Hey, Cass. Guess what?" The blind girl turned to her and smiled. "You've finally received an armor-type memory." Simultaneously, Nephi said, "I found something decent to wear." Then she fell silent and stared at her smiling friend. Cassie laughed. "The sound of your footsteps changed." Changing Star blinked. "Ah. I see. Well, it's from the Carapace Centurion." While she was describing the armor to Kasha and letting her touch the mysterious white metal it was forged out of, Sunny relaxed and rested by the fire. Some time later, Nephi's was busy preparing dinner. Sunny was once again lying lazily on the stones and staring into the sky. The sky, like always, was gray and unfriendly. With all three of them equipped with decent armor, they were finally starting to resemble a real awakened cohort. In fact, Sunny thought that their group was rather eye-catching even by awakened standards. In her light tunic and sea-wave cloak, beautiful and delicate Cassie looked like a princess. Lithe and poised, Nephi's was like a noble knight tasked with protecting her. Sunny, however, if he was generous to himself, he would say that he looked like a young squire. But truthfully, he resembled a page boy a lot more, at best. If a random stranger were to see the three of them, that stranger would most likely assume that Sunny was either a lowly servant or a feeble ruffian that had been captured by the noble lady's guard. Well, that'll just add to their surprise when I stab them in the back. Wait, why would he stab a random stranger? Ah, who cares? I'm sure there'll be a reason. At that moment, Cassie sat down by his side. Sunny turned his head, looking at the blind girl with a bit of surprise. She bit her lip. "Nephi's told me that you almost died yesterday." "Oh, so that's what this is about." He shrugged. "Yeah." Then, with a silent sigh, Sunny added, "But don't worry about it too much. It's not my first brush with death." Although it was, as far as he knew, the closest. The memory still sent shivers running down his spine. Cassie was silent for a while. Then, she quietly said, "I'm sorry." Sunny raised his eyebrows. "Sorry? What are you sorry for?" The blind girl lowered her eyes. "For being so useless." Sunny frowned and looked away. A second or two later, he said in his usual careless tone, "You're not useless." Cassie softly chuckled. "Aren't I? If I want to walk, I need to be leashed to you or Neph. If I want to eat, I need to wait for one of you to feed me. That's my life now. I can't do even the simplest of things without your help, let alone be of use to either of you in return." Slowly, her voice turned raw with emotion. This was the first time Sunny had seen her mask of resolve slip a little, revealing the desperate, angry, frightened face beneath. He was silent for a long time. Then, he said, "Hey, have I ever told you about my first nightmare?" The blind girl shook her head. Sunny half closed his eyes. "My first nightmare was as bad as it gets. To tell you the truth, the situation was pretty hopeless. I was a slave destined to die of cold or mistreatment. Chained, bleeding, defenseless. What's worse, my aspect turned out to be completely useless. I mean, literally. If I remember correctly, the phrase the spell chosen to describe it was, a useless wretch with no skills or abilities worth a mention." Cassie turned her head slightly, visibly drawn in by his words. "Then, how did you survive? Did things change for the better?" Sunny smiled. "Gods no. In fact, they quickly turned worse. Much, much worse. But, what would you know? In a strange twist of fate, my useless aspect turned out to be the only thing that could guide me through that mess alive. In that regard, I was incredibly lucky." He shifted a little and glanced at the delicate girl, noticing a thoughtful frown on her face. "But here is a thing about luck. People usually speak about it as though luck is something that just happens to you. It's not. Luck is 50% circumstance and 50% your own ability to grasp it. Luck is something you have to make happen yourself. I fought with everything I had to survive. That's one of the two reasons I'm still here." Saying that, Sunny remembered the cold, dark mountain and shivered. Then, pushing the chilling memories away, he continued, the second reason is the spell itself. I won't go as far as to call it reasonable, but it is fair, in its own, perverted way. The spell takes with one hand and gives with the other. It was like this with my first nightmare, and it is the same with you. Cassie's frown deepened. Sonny chose his next words very carefully. Eventually, he said, your flaw is the most debilitating one I have ever seen or heard of. You are right, without help from someone like Neff, it would have been a certain death sentence. And people like her, well, I'm not even sure that someone else like that exists. But. The blind girl gritted her teeth. But what? Sonny looked at her with a serious expression. But that also means that the other side of the flaw, your power, is equally as extraordinary. You just haven't found the way to grasp it yet. When you do, believe me, you'll remember this conversation and feel very embarrassed about how naive and foolish you were. Cassie's expression changed to one of doubt and confusion. Do you really think so? She whispered. There was a hint of desperate desire in her voice. However, the question itself almost made him laugh, for an obvious reason. Trust me. I'm the most honest person in the world. 2 worlds, in fact. Sonny would actually love nothing more than to be less honest, but, sadly, he was physically incapable of doing so. Of course, she didn't have to know that. Cassie was silent for a long time, lost in thought. It looked as though she was in the throes of some inner struggle. Sonny almost assumed that their conversation was over, but then she suddenly said in a low, raspy voice, I had more visions than I told you guys about. Chapter 56, The Heaviest Thing in the World. He blinked, staring at the blind girl with surprise and a bit of apprehension. Her sudden statement really threw him off. Why would she keep something like this secret? And why tell him now? Confused, he asked carefully, more visions. Why haven't you told us? A fleeting, tired smile appeared on Cassie's face. She lowered her head and remained silent for a while. Then, closing her eyes, she said, you probably don't know. How could you know? But knowledge can be really heavy. It can be as heavy as the heaviest thing in the world. Then, a sad smile appeared on her face. I am afraid that by telling you, I will actually cause the things I saw to come true. Sonny tensed up, alarmed by the implication behind her words. If she was afraid of the visions coming true, then their content must have been pretty bad. And if it was really bad? If something terrible was destined to befall them, Sonny had to know about it in advance. That way, he would be able to make preparations and deal with whatever happens. As long as he was prepared, many things would become much less dire. However, what if his preparations would become the very reason for the terrible thing to happen, making Cassie's vision a self-fulfilling prophecy? This was the danger of knowing the future. Damn it, my head hurts. I hate this crap. Sonny struggled for a long time, trying to decide if he should pressure Cassie to reveal her visions. Either outcome was going to leave him uneasy, so he was really not sure what to do. In the end, unable to make a decision, Sonny simply remained silent. Cassie also didn't say anything. After some time had passed, she finally spoke, Can you just promise me one thing? It seemed as though this was her attempt to find a compromise between revealing everything and doing nothing. Sonny frowned. That depends on what it is. The blind girl hesitated before speaking. Can you promise that you'll take care of Neff? No matter what. He delayed answering for as long as the growing pain allowed him. When it became almost unbearable, Sonny reluctantly said, I can't. I can barely take care of myself. He also didn't trust Nephi's enough to make a promise like that. He had nothing against Changing Star and even liked her quite a bit, but they didn't really know each other. Their alliance was one of necessity, not choice. Who knew what would happen once their need for each other was no longer there? No matter what was too steep of a requirement. Of course, he could have misled Cassie by answering yes. After all, the question was whether or not he could make a promise, not whether or not he would follow through with it. But at that moment, Sonny was strangely reluctant to deceive the blind girl. Maybe that whole honesty thing was slowly growing on him. Cassie sighed and turned away. Suddenly, it felt like something imperceptible about her changed. I see. Yeah. That's fair. With that, she summoned her staff and walked away, leaving Sonny in a somber and uneasy mood, just like he had expected. No matter how much he tried to relax after that, his thoughts kept wandering. Eventually, Sunny found himself trying to find connections between various pieces of information about the Starless Void, or the Forgotten Shore, as it was called in the Azure Blade's description. If nothing else, it could distract him from thinking about the latter part of their conversation with Cassie. Also, for some reason, the need to understand their environment suddenly seemed much more vital. His sword, the Starlight Legion armor, the carapace monsters and the giant headless statue seemed to be connected in some way, but he couldn't quite understand how. Was the statue a monument to one of the 7 founders of the Starlight Legion? The line of runes describing the armor said that their names and faces were lost to time. The statue's missing head would certainly fit that description. The scavenger's echo suggested that the carapace monsters were cursed soldiers of the Fallen Legion. Was that Fallen Legion the Starlight Legion? The fact that he had received the Starlight armor after slaying a carapace centurion was almost a certain confirmation of that theory. If so, why were they cursed? Starless Void, Starlight Legion. What did all of it mean? The 7 heroes were described as being born in the all-consuming darkness. Their oath was to return light to the cursed land. What light did they seek? Starlight. And what was the nature of the all-consuming darkness? Was it the manifestation of the curse that befell their land? And if so, was it the same curse that eventually turned soldiers of the Starlight Legion into carapace monsters? If the curse was still around, was Sunny going to wake up one day with patches of chitin growing over his skin? What a creepy thought. The 7 heroes were forgotten, but the memory of their oath, apparently, still remained. On this forgotten shore, only Steel remembers, that was the Azure Blade's description. Was there a hidden meaning behind these words? Were the memories received on the forgotten shore hiding a secret? Inwardly, Sunny groaned. So many questions, and not a single answer. And then there was the main mystery, Cassie's vision, the one she chose to reveal to them. She dreamt of a boundless darkness locked behind 7 seals. Once the seals were broken, the darkness escaped. She also saw a crimson spire with 7 severed heads guarding 7 locks. Were these locks connected to the seals? And was the giant knight's missing head one of the 7 guarding them? Or was he completely wrong about everything, leaping to conclusions and forcing connections where none existed? Sunny sighed, knowing that his curiosity would not be quenched any time soon. He had too little information to make a proper theory. If so, there was no point in torturing himself right now. Maybe things will become clearer in the future. The word future made him frown. Chapter 57, Use of Weapons. In the evening, Sunny continued to practice with the sword under Nef's watchful eye. With his new insight, every movement felt different from before. After the 1,000 strikes were finished, he sat down to rest and studied the Azure Blade, tempted to continue obsessing over the abundant mysteries of the Forgotten Shore. After a while, Sunny asked, "Do you think I'm well suited to use a sword? Should I consider switching weapons in the future?" Nephi shrugged. "That depends on your goals. However, the sword is considered to be the king of weapons for a reason." Sunny smiled. "And why is that?" She tilted her head and deliberated for a few seconds. Then, she asked, "Do you know how natural selection works?" He raised an eyebrow. "Survival of the fittest. The strongest species survives." Changing Star glanced at him. "Somewhat correct. But actually, it's not the strongest species that survive, it's the most adaptable. Otherwise, lions and tigers and bears would have been the ones ruling the world instead of humans." Sunny knew about lions and bears from archival footage, but he had no idea what a tiger was. Probably another extinct predator. Meanwhile, Nef continued, not at all like her usual taciturn self. She seemed to be much more eloquent when talking about subjects she was confident in. The same logic can be applied to combat. A sword is not the most effective tool in every situation. A spear is more useful against enemies with long reach. A war hammer is much better against armor. A mace is easier to maintain. However, swords are the most versatile. She cast a gaze at the Azure Blade. A sword can pierce, it can cut, it can bash. It can be used effectively at a variety of ranges. It is swift and maneuverable. Every part of the sword, from tip to pommel, can be used to attack. While wielding a sword, you won't be the best at everything. But you'll be the most adaptable. Nephi's turned to him. Do you understand? Sunny thought for a bit before answering. I think I do. She gave him a nod and looked away. But in the end, you must remember one thing. It doesn't matter that much what's in your hands. A sword, a spear, a club, that's just tools. You are the weapon. He sighed and dismissed the azure blade. As always, Changing Star's lesson gave him a lot to think about. You are the weapon. He repeated it in his mind, feeling as though another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Together, they watched the sun set in comfortable silence. As the night approached, the sea was coming back, flooding the crimson labyrinth like a rush of darkness. Far below them, scavengers were scurrying to find a hiding place. A few of them were climbing the cliffs, hoping to spend the night on the small island. Sunny's shadow was keeping an eye on them. We're going to have guests soon, he said, disheartened at the thought that their short respite was about to end. Nephi sighed. That's all right. With the higher ground advantage, dealing with them won't be too hard. Sunny nodded and looked at the disappearing sun. Suddenly, his mood turned solemn. Doubt raised its ugly head, plunging his mind into the gloomy embrace of anxiety. Staring into the distance, Sunny hesitated and asked, Do you think we'll be able to reach that castle? She glanced at him with no particular expression on her face. Yes. He turned to her and forced a smile. Why are you so sure? In the blood-red blaze of the sunset, Changing Star's calm eyes seemed to burn with heavenly fire. Looking west, she summoned her sword and answered, If that is our will, who dares to stop us? Dealing with the climbing scavengers, indeed, turned out to be comparatively easy. Sunny and Nephi's just had to ambush and push the bulky creatures off the cliff before they could find stable purchase. He received 4 shadow fragments practically for free, increasing the overall number to 32. Sadly, the soul shards couldn't be retrieved. They spent another day on the cliffs, resting and training. Sunny practiced with the sword while his shadow explored the nearby paths of the labyrinth. With the echo still recovering, their group was not in its optimal condition. That's why there was no point in hastily abandoning their current camp. However, very soon they were going to resume the journey west, moving from one height to another in hopes of reaching the mysterious human citadel. This time they were not going to travel without sufficient preparations. Knowing that a sudden storm could come at any moment, covering the world with darkness and summoning the sea back before sunset, the 3 sleepers decided to thoroughly scout a route before committing to moving their camp to the next landmark. Nephi spent the day meditating. Her eyes were closed. From time to time, it seemed as though a soft white glow was radiating from behind her eyelids. However, when Sunny looked closely, it was always gone, making him think that he was just imagining things. He suspected that Changing Star was training herself to endure the pain of her flaw. If so, he wished her luck. Cassie behaved like her usual self, being cheerful and friendly. It was as though their strange conversation had never happened. However, Sunny could feel that something about her was different. He couldn't quite put a finger on what exactly had changed about the blind girl, but she seemed to possess more resolve. It wasn't a bad thing. They spent some time chatting and remembering their time in the academy. Sunny told her about his lessons with teacher Julius and various strange things he had learned from the old man. Her reaction to the idea of studying dead languages of the dream realm was exactly the same as Sunny's initial protest and bewilderment. Soon, the night was upon them again. This time, no scavenger tried to climb the cliffs, so Sunny and Nephi's could rest easy. However, they still slept in turns, keeping watch over the camp in case something unexpected happened. In the morning, they ate the last of the centurion's meat and prepared to climb down into the labyrinth. It was time to continue their journey.